de la famille.
Good evening, everyone. First, thank you very much to the family for hosting this event with us. The family is a very special place for me. I first came here in 2014, had just worked for 3 years in consulting, making slides, and I had decided that I wanted to go in tech. So I thought the first thing I should do is learn how to code. So I joined Le Wagon. It was one of the first batches. I still had a room here upstairs. And so I took 3 months to learn Ruby on Rails. Unfortunately, I realized quite quickly that I was a pretty bad developer. And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do next? And I reached out to Osama, who very kindly agreed to grab a coffee with me. And so we spoke, and after 5-10 minutes, he looked at me, and Osama style, he was like, you're definitely not a developer. I don't think you're an entrepreneur either. You should be a VC. It's like, okay, I'm going to look into that. And so from one conversation to the next, one intro to the next, with a bit of luck, I ended up joining Accel in London, which is one of the big US funds investing all across the world. And at Accel, I spent 3 years, a lot of time in Paris, where I was super excited about the French tech scene, also about what the family was doing, thanks to them. In 2015, I met Firmin from Payfit. At the time, he was alone with his co-founder. They were working on the first version of the solution from their apartment in the 70s. I really liked their vision and what I was doing and really followed them. And in the end, we managed to convince them to partner with them. So in 2017, we invested in Payfit, and Firmin will be on stage a little bit later today. And it's really incredible to see what happened between 2015 and today. Also, thanks to the family, we met the founding team at Zenaton, who is still working from here and which we partnered with last year. And so now that I left Accel and joined Stride, Fred and Harry, I'm super excited to do this first event with them here in Paris. I think I gave you a few anecdotes of why the family is a very important place for me, but I think it's a very important place and really the heart of the ecosystem in Paris, so really excited to be here. So I'm going to invite my partner, Fred Destin, on stage first, who's going to give you a keynote on surviving your first 24 months as a startup. And this would be followed by Harry, so our third partner, who is also the founder of the 20-Minute VC. So I don't know if any of you have already listened to that podcast. Maybe you can raise your hands. So quite a few. If not, it's a great podcast, and he will interview Firmin on stage after that, and then we will leave a bit of time for Q&A, followed by drinks.
All right, super. Thank you, Pia. Pia and I worked together for 2 years at Accel, and I'm a huge fan. All right, so we're going to talk. You know, the family are known as barbarians, right? Because they break the rules, and to a certain extent, entrepreneurs do the same thing. And what I find with VCs very often is you don't get the truth. You get a sort of sugar-coated version of the truth, hoping that you're going to be big and we're your biggest fans until we aren't. So my presentation is about the common mistakes that startups make in the first 24 months of their life. And it's not necessarily the most uplifting, but it's meant to be real, right? So you can think about how to apply it to your business. Longfellow Bridge in Boston, where I used to live and have fond memories of. So I've been in venture for about 18 years. I think done well. It's a wonderful job. I've had, invested in 25 seed companies, about 17 Series A. We're lucky enough to have a bunch of exits, which is great. And a lot of these companies I came into at the stage where there were 5, 7, 10 people. And it's really the stage that I love the most, which is also why I left Accel to kind of go back to my roots, which is very early stage. I'm from Belgium, if you're wondering. So, not too many of us. It's a bit like women in tech, Belgians in tech. It's a sort of a oppressed minority. So before we talk about the actual typical mistakes, let's talk a little bit about how venture capitalists see you, right? And try and, again, tell you in plain English and in an honest way how you're going to be perceived inside a venture capital portfolio. So start with the concept of what a startup is, right? So Stephen Gary Blank, who you should read, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, if memory serves me right, is the best book probably on startup building, said that startups are effectively a temporary organization in search of a repeatable and scalable business model. And if you think about all the aspects of that, it's basically it sort of encapsulates what you're trying to do as a company. And we as venture capitalists, we basically invest in people and a vision that we like, and then we think about de-risking every step of the way, because our role effectively is to hopefully be conviction investors and back things that can be great, but then try and help you de-risk it along the way. One way to think about it, and to think about how attractive you are as an investment asset, is as a sort of surface triangle that would encapsulate team, technology, and traction. If your team's exceptional, you're going to get funded. I just backed Alec Chesterman, the founder of Zoopla. He raised a £30 million seed round with nothing else but his name. But that's because he's the founder of Zoopla, gets sold for $3 billion to Silver Lake, founder of Love Film. He doesn't need anything other than the T that stands for team. If your technology is amazing and you have an incredible technology asset and a good team, that's probably enough to get funded. If you don't have great tech, you need to show traction, right? So you can kind of think about how much of that surface area you cover. If you have an amazing team, great technology, and great traction, you're golden. You can probably raise from Sequoia on your seed round. Now, what's important to understand is how skewed the outcomes are. So this graph says on the x-axis is the number of companies in the portfolio, 1 to 20, and then on the y-axis is the investment returns. And we all start in life thinking we're going to make it, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't. And maybe that's the blue curve. We think, most companies are at least going to make money back, and then some of them are going to be in the 5x territory. The reality is not like that at all. It is hyper skewed. So we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4 companies that end up producing 80% of the returns, right? And if you think about the way we build a portfolio, we might invest in 25 companies, which is our strategy, 25 companies at seed. And out of those, 3, 4, 5 will be quote-unquote signature companies, and they'll drive all of our returns. And the rest, there's a proportion that will do okay, and then there's a proportion that won't do well. And whatever we say about how much we love you, at some point, this curve will start to deepen, and you will be either on the left-hand side of the graph or the right-hand side of the graph. And it is the job of the VC to be a portfolio manager. So no matter how much we love you and we might be supportive and we might help you try and get to the best outcome, at some point you will segregate across that graph. And we will probably focus most of our attention on the companies that are on the left-hand side. Another way to think about this is we're looking for 2 things. We're looking for upside. So we call that, in Stride parlance, we call that glimmer of greatness. We don't need to touch the upside, but we need to be able to envision what a great company can be built. And the other thing is impact. If I can only put 100K to work in your company, even if you end up doing 100 times return, it doesn't really help me because I haven't put enough capital to work, right? So I need to be able to put a few million into the company and then hopefully have a 20, 30, 50x so that I can return my fund on a single investment. And the way we hurdle ourselves is to say, does every company that we put in the portfolio have the potential to return the fund on its own? And if it doesn't, we probably don't do it, which is why, if you're building a low cash intensity, it could be an attractive business, but it's a low cash intensity, low growth, kind of, what I would call a slow boat to China, that's fine, but it's not the kind of stuff we back, right? We're always looking for that upside and that impact. And then the next thing we look for is, okay, can we build the mechanics of scalability? And effectively, technology companies have one beautiful thing, which is operating leverage. And operating leverage means you're able to automate customer support and maybe lead generation and all aspects of your business so that at the core, you have a small, high-quality engineering team, a little bit of commercial wrapper around it, but we are able to build these highly scalable companies because ultimately we need companies not only that generate revenues but are highly profitable, and that's what the mechanics of technology enable us to do. Now, the last thing I would say is when we look at founding teams, every time the magic is to be found outside your zone of comfort. So if you're a team of 2 engineers, what you need to do day one, go talk to customers, go sit inside their office. You might be convinced of your product skills, or your engineering skills, or your design skills. But what you should really do is actually go to the places that are uncomfortable for you. Go talk to customers, go test the reality of your project against what the market says. If you're business people, we came across a team like that again the other week. Great business guys, great minds, quantitative, incredible thinkers. And then we get to the design part, and they're doing a sort of betting exchange. And they had 0 design skills. And I said, well, okay, so the only interface you have with the consumers is the product. They said, well, no, we're going to hire a front-end developer. And in my mind, I was going, it's like you have not appreciated to what extent what you don't know is going to hurt you. So this is a general rule in startups. What you don't know is what's going to hurt you. So go find out, right? The Americans are way better at doing this than Europeans. We're still convinced, because we have great engineers, because we have people who've been trained at Central and all these wonderful places. We're like, hey, we can nail tech. It's completely irrelevant. If you don't nail tech in contact with your market, you will fail. And I would say American companies typically are not as well engineered as French companies, but man, they're way faster in front of their customers than in front of their market. So that's a little bit of a preamble, if you like, to just give you a flavor of the reality of how we think about startups. There are 4 key things, and I'm focused here on the first 24 months of your life. There are a whole different set of issues when you scale that have more to do with actually the importance of culture, etc., which we could talk about some other day. But focusing on the first 2 years of life. What typically kills company? And we're going to go through talent, time, choices, and cash in order. So I always say defeat starts at home. Man, the number of times that I've seen self-inflicted harm inside startups that was avoidable because of internal dynamics that don't work is endless. The classic example is strife between founders. It's one of the hardest problems to solve, which is your co-founder and you fall out. Or your third co-founder and you fall out. It happens all the time. A famous example is Zipcar. Robin, I'm forgetting her last name, Robin and her co-founder, so 2 ladies started Zipcar. And her co-founder stopped showing up for work after a year. They were disagreeing, and she thought the journey was too hard. And she hadn't put any reverse vesting on the founder equity, and she ended up owning, so the other lady ended up owning 50% of the company that Robin built. I mean, that is a good story of a company that made it, but where one person worked to make the other one rich for 5 to 7 years of her life through the endless task that is being a founder CEO. So you really want to be ruthlessly objective about protecting your company when you look at internal dynamics that don't work. If you have a fallout with your co-founder, decisions need to be made. It doesn't matter if it's your childhood friend. It will kill your business more certainly than anything else. The other typical problem is with asshole investors. You can fire anyone within your company except your freaking board member, right? Except your investor. You can't fire them. You can try and get them to sell secondary, but generally, this is one of the longest term choices that you can make in terms of, especially the initial partners that you take to fund you. So bad business angels, man, there's a ton of them. People who think they know are very dangerous. And then toxic VCs. And VCs have a problem because they always think they know better. They think their job is to tell you how to run your company. They have limited accountability. And so if you end up with somebody who's toxic on your board, I can guarantee you it will hurt and you won't be able to do anything about it. So I always say I'd rather not get funded than take money from an asshole, right? And it doesn't matter how desperate you are to get your company off the ground. Please don't let toxic investors into your cap table. Number 2 is time. So when you start a company, you're like, all right, great, 3 months, I'll be recruiting the team, 3 months, we're going to develop product, 3 months, we're going to launch, 3 months, we're going to have a bunch of metrics. And then we get to Series A with a fully fledged team, with nice early adoption, numbers that we can show, and we'll be ready. And then, of course, life never works that way, right? So your first back-end engineer turns out, oh, sure, he was at Amazon, but actually he's a dud, and you have to fire him, and you have to rehire. Then you hire a new guy who says, actually, your back-end, your Postgres is not scaling properly, and your back-end is way harder to build than we thought, and then you waste another 3 months, like maybe refactoring your code. And then by the time you launch, you're almost out of cash, and you start to panic, and you're in recovery mode, and then you get into vicious spirals. So it is much better, as with most things in life, is like plan for the worst. And whatever you think you're going to execute against, add 6 months to it. And then, tool yourself and spend the money accordingly so that you don't end up running into the wall. And I find that wishful thinking in an early stage company is insanely dangerous. So just don't do it. Plan for the worst. Assume that things are going to go wrong because they will. And a sort of parallel of that is, in the olden days, you used to raise a seed and then develop your product in-house for 24 months, and then you raise an A, it was sort of clean. And we live in a sort of a messy world where the market's so chaotic and it's evolving so fast and your competition's moving so quickly that, you can't really, and the technology platforms are moving, you can't really think like that. So in a way, in the early stages, you kind of sort of constantly have to be thinking about your fundraising options. And these are some US examples, but do a Kickstarter, or think about a Kickstarter campaign. Think about using angel lists to fill out your round. Keep your round open so you can take more angel money. Like whatever it takes, always keep your funding options open. And on that note, one thing you should never ever do, especially in France, where it's like a bit of a disease in the venture landscape, is don't trust your investors if they tell you, we've got your back on the next round. Because the reality is they don't know, you don't know. And I think as a founder, I've seen too many times VCs going, yeah, sure, we got you, go, we'll give you a bridge loan. And then you get to the end and you need another €1 million, and suddenly they're like, well, actually my partnership isn't that hot on it. And either you end up with a cram down round or you end up going bust. And so it is your responsibility, I guess, as a founder to always make sure that you have these options. And I mean, I try and play a game where I'm incredibly transparent with people in terms of the likelihood that we can fund them. But, I would say that in France, people call that le coup de l'accordéon. Some VCs will effectively engineer you running out of cash so they can recap your company, right? So they're not all angels, if I can use that term. Right, then we come maybe to the most important thing, which is you as a founder. So what is the most difficult thing about being a founder in the absolute? The most difficult thing is you have to make decisions with no data, or bad data, or limited data, or false positive data, but you still have to make freaking decisions, right? So your primary job as a founder is to make decisions under conditions of uncertainty. And it's really hard because it's scary, because these decisions commit your company to a certain path, and you don't know the outcome. I would tell you that I think the defining characteristic of successful founders is that they make a lot of decisions fast. And by the way, why is this particularly hard? Because the easy decisions will be made by your team, right? If it's an easy decision, it's either obvious or it's been made by somebody who works for you. If it comes back on your desk, it's probably a hard decision. And so your objective is not to be right. Your objective is to have a kind of batting average that's better than 51%. If you're right 65% of the time, you're probably doing great. And the other 35% of the time, you're going to be wrong. But it's still your job to make decisions. This is the general pattern quote, better a imperfect plan executed this week than a perfect plan executed next week. By the way, any questions on the fly, I'll take them. So I'll leave some Q&A time, but if you want to interject, just jump. And then the next thing is, for the rest of your organization, your job is to define a mission, make sure everybody understands the mission, constantly communicate the mission, and make sure everybody's focused only on the mission, right? There's so much entropy in startups and so many distractions that it is hyper important that you always keep the northern light, the North Star, I should say, and that you're kind of holding that vision in your hand and make sure the team understands it. In startups, usually the founders are very good, and they can be heroic sometimes. They can pull They can pull miracles, white rabbits out of the hat, right? When you start having salespeople and other people, they're a degraded carbon copy of you in a way, because nobody has the vision and the mission in the same way that you do. But you still have to empower salespeople to go and sell your company, right? And to, in 3 sentences, 5 sentences, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, convince customers to part with their money. So this is why this notion of defining the mission of the company very clearly and making sure everybody's always aligned on the language, on the way it's communicated, on the how to make it effective in terms of how you communicate it to people is super important. And then the last thing is, move the ball down the field every day. It is so easy to be distracted when you're a company founder by the million things you have to do, accounting, whatever it may be, right? Like there's always things conspiring to take your eye off the ball. And I would say that the best founders I've worked with, actually, you know what, they'd never show up at a networking event. So maybe the 12 of you that are founders, you should go home right now. But joking aside, Alex Chesterman at Zoopla was never seen at a conference during the entire time that he built Zoopla, not one time. Because every day he was moving the ball down the field, right? And so you got to think about what's meaningful progress and kill the rest. And I would say that even your family or your spouse or your girlfriend or your husband needs to understand the level of commitment that it's going to take for you to be successful. Because if they don't empathize with the journey of being a founder and the fact that you're sometimes going to have to be like so insanely focused, then you're going to be in trouble. And then finally, there's that old acronym, cash is more important than your mother. I forget who said it. It's from the 60s. The ultimate job, the only thing that will kill you with certainty is running out of cash, right? It sounds trite, but how many times have I been with people that, they're 3 months from out of cash and they're not panicking about funding? I'm like, how does that work? It's like, well, we start fundraising in a month, we'll have launched a product, blah, 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 and then we'll start fundraising. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, you're out of cash in 3 months. Let me work that back. You can't make payroll in 2.5 months. Which means you're going to have a lawyer on your board in 2 months telling you whether you're trading insolvent or not, which means you have 40 days, 50 days before you are in trouble. And people go like, oh shit. Or they trust their CFO because they've outsourced finance to the CFO. CFO is great, and CFO is not that competent. It happens all the time. Or CFO is a bit dilettante, or CFO doesn't understand working capital, or the business is just complicated. It's always your job, your primary job, I guess, to not run out of cash. It sounds obvious. You'd be surprised how many times you end up running into the wall, not realizing how fast the wall is coming. And at the end of the day, it boils down to the thing you need to be successful is focus. What focus means in practice is that you're going to make choices. So when you start a company, you have a myriad of choices: go-to-market, strategy, pricing, product, and there's all these choices, right? They're in front of you, and you think, well, that's great. I could try to sell to large enterprises, and I can try lead generation for SMBs, and you think, I'm going to try everything. So the surest way to fail is not to make decisions and to impose focus upon yourself and your company. But focus is like a scary thing because you're making decisions, and if you're wrong, your company might fail. So which is why a lot of people end up with like this decision paralysis, because they're like, I don't want to commit down a path because I don't know if it's the right path. Well, if you don't commit down a certain path, you will fail almost certainly, right? So this is back to the need to make decisions in conditions of uncertainty, define the mission, and then force focus. One of the exercises I do very often is a sort of plan 5 years out what you want to look like as a company, decide 3 years out what the key pillars of the business are, work your way back to 12 months out underneath the key pillars, what are the 5 or 6 things that we need to do. It's a great forcing function exercise because half the time we end up with, under each pillar, we have 18 things we want to do. And it's the role the company has to decide what 5 things they're going to be able to execute on and what 5 things shouldn't be there. I'll give you one example. Deliveroo, in the early days, decided to kill its mobile app. And you think like, well, that's crazy. How could Deliveroo not have a mobile application? Well, I'll tell you the reason why we're successful in the UK is because we decided not to do a mobile app. We did web only. We were way faster at deploying across restaurants. We just focused on like, if we have critical mass of users in restaurants, we'll be fine. And so we used mobile web. It wasn't perfect, but it kind of worked. And we were way quicker than competition. And in the meantime, there was a great company here in Paris, Take It Easy, actually Belgian founders. They did a beautiful app, man. They had like photos of the menus and ratings on a dish-by-dish level. And we trounced them because we took a very hard, simplified route with a simpler product that we were able to scale way faster. And then we backfilled with a great mobile app and pictures, etc. But so our product was inferior, but our strategy was much more explosive, right? And that's an example of focus where, when Martin Mignot from Index and myself are on the board with Will going, why don't we not do a mobile app for now? It was kind of, okay, breathe and go, because everybody around us was telling us, you got to do a mobile app. Are you crazy, right? It turns out, I think in retrospect, it was probably a good decision. These are the things I wanted to share about what typically kills companies. A lot of them are avoidable, and they're manageable if you kind of plan for the worst and just sort of be ready for a longer haul than you think. And I leave you with this little story of IndieGoGo. So the founder of IndieGoGo started the business, and she said, oh, I'm going to get funding in 6 months. And then after 9 months, she wasn't funded. And then after a year, in her own words, Danae Ringelmann is her name, Danae said, well, I'm just not going to get funded. And she stopped obsessing about funding, and she's just like, I'll just fucking build a business, right? And she gradually, every day, moving the ball down the field, adding something to how the company was built. And in the end, 18 months in, money came in. And money came in because she never let funding or the relationship with the VC or whatever be an obstacle. She just had a sense of purpose around what she wanted to build. She kept on building it, and at some point, the money came to her, right? And so one of the, I guess the parting message would be, don't let fundraising be something that blocks you where like, if only I could raise money, then I can do X. Just build it. Moonlight your way through it, whatever you need to do. And the more you move the ball down the field every day, the more you add customers or features to your product, etc., the more likely you are to get funded, right? Like funding is an outcome of you building the right thing. So that's all I had for you today. I'm happy to take any questions, and I promise to answer them honestly. I'm at Fred Destin. You can read me on Medium. And yeah, I like to talk, so feel free. Hi. Do you have a floating mic? Just say your name and where you're from would be great.
My name is Claire, and I'm from Paris. I like to think of VCs as entrepreneur of entrepreneurs. So as you're just kicking off with Stride, what is it that you think you're going to struggle with the most? What do you think you're going to be good at as an entrepreneur yourself? And if you were a company looking for funding with you, what do you think are the 3 questions that we should ask you?
Yeah, so raising a fund is sort of a bizarre experience because it's got a very long lead time. And so I would say that the most important factor of success that I think Harry and I gave ourselves at the beginning and now with Pia is to put ourselves in the mindset of we will not fail. Because raising a first-time fund, even with my track record and Harry's amazing podcast, is hard. So we started out just thinking we will not fail. And so it didn't matter how long it took and how much effort we had to put in, we're just going to get there. So we don't let doubt seep into our mind. The biggest difficulty in a first-time fund is finding true believers. So people who are effectively willing to write the first check on a first-time team. Harry's like half my age. We're kind of a weird animal. And effectively having and continuing to build the self-belief together that we could bring across the table to tell people, to give people the confidence to write us a check with nothing. So I don't think we've... So the struggle comes from the sort of slow progress and the grind that is involved with with raising a fund. One of the side benefits, because I used to be at Accel, Accel fundraising takes 4 weeks. You go shake hands, you wait for the cash to come in. It's kind of insane. The benefit of the struggle is that you develop a lot of empathy, a lot more than I had before, I guess, with the pain of the fundraising process that entrepreneurs go through. I think with any VC, so for me, the key is, do people have a fundamental understanding of a business? And I mean, by that I mean at quite a deep level. Are they asking pragmatic and simple questions that relate to how you have to build it? It's not about highfalutin strategy stuff. It's like, do I feel like people engage in a coherent way with what I'm trying to build? Do they understand my culture? Do they respect me? And you want to test, I think the primary thing you want to test with a VC is actually test a relationship. And by that I mean, find an area of disagreement and like lean in a little bit hard. Have like a real disagreement with your potential investor, and then find out what they're like under conditions of pressure, whether you have a conflict resolution mechanism that works, whether you like disagreeing with them, right? Because if somebody really cares about what you're building, they're not always going to be a cheerleader. Sometimes they're going to want to challenge you, but challenge you in a way that's respectful. So that's where I would push as an entrepreneur to understand whether the VC in front of me is just selling me well. We're pretty good at selling, right? Like VCs know how to sell themselves. Or whether I can build a relationship of trust that's going to carry me through many years. The questions you should ask us, I don't know. I don't have generic answers to anything. I try and be very mentally plastic. So I think depending on the project and the person you're talking to is probably going to vary. So I'm afraid I don't have a set answer for that. I think like I said, I think this business done well, if the relationships are real and we can do away with the jargon and the bullshit and the pathology of venture capital and all that stuff, it can be wonderful. And I think to the extent you can, I'd always optimize over find a relationship that you like versus like valuation and brand. And it's people, right? People back people. So you find the true believer on the other side, they'll stick with you through thick and thin, and the only time when a VC relationship really matters is when you're going through thin. Because the rest of the time, if your company is doing great, it's plain sailing, it's fine. It's what happens when the going gets really tough. Can you bring your own personal anxieties and fears and even failings to your investor and board member, or are you getting crucified every time you kind of talk about something that's going wrongly in the business? That for me is probably more important than any of the other stuff like the brand and all that crap. Anybody else? Sorry, it's not a great answer, but I don't have a canned answer to that. It's okay.
Hello, my name is Duke. Say I'm in a business school. Well, I studied in a business school. Say I want to build my own company and find another co-founder who is from another business school. What's the added value of having two co-founders from business schools if we want to build a tech company?
All right, so there's a few things that concern me about what you said. The first one is that building a company is really, really, really hard, right? It's, I mean, unless you're very lucky, but it's a hard freaking journey, and it's long and it's slow, and you put yourself at risk. And so I would say you have to find something that you really want to do, because the only thing that's going to carry you through the tough times is having purpose. So when I see some guys that are out of Rocket Internet and they've done gap analysis and they're like, oh, we're going to sell mattresses online, like I tend to run for the fucking hills, right? Because I'm like, what sense of purpose and mission do you have around this? And then the answer is none. They're just like, oh, the economics work well, I'm going to go build a business that sells mattresses online. They might be successful, but I think whenever I've done well is with people who built something they really cared about. It's almost like they couldn't do anything else, right? TJ Parker at PillPack in pharmacy, there are people like that who have a very strong sense of purpose and mission. So don't go for building a company just because of lifestyle, right? And if Josh Koppelman at First Round Capital said something quite powerful on Harry's blog the other day. He said, so we as investors, we are very well trained to do what he called the pick. So in other words, picking entrepreneurs, picking companies. And he said he was constantly surprised by how little time and energy founders spend finding the pick. So it's like usually it's like, hey, I want to be in a startup. Okay, great. Oh, this idea is great. Boom. And then before you know it, you've committed 5 to 7 years of your life to a project that you picked a little bit at random. And so the first thing I would tell you is like, man, take your time. Maybe your company, you will start it in 24 months. Yeah, wait until you find something that you're like, I understand this problem. I'm fucking passionate about it. You know, this is something that I'm willing to dedicate a decade of my life to with no certainty of outcome, right? So I would say take your time on that. Why would you want a founder from another business school? I mean,
Because he's my friend.
Well, so if you already found him, that's cool. Then I would say like find number 3 who's very different from you guys. So you kind of, or her, I don't know. So you bring a bit of, you know, just a different viewpoint. I think business school plus business school has a, you know, it's kind of almost a dangerous combo. So I would say like, you know, if you can from day one, like try and inject a different perspective, and please don't underestimate technology. So, you know, the first thing I would do is probably make sure you've picked the right idea, and then spend 6 months if you need, and force yourself to find number 3 who's a tech person. It would be my 2 cents. Or a product person. I hate starting companies without product or engineering at the heart of it. Anybody else? Just question there? Oh, sorry.
No problem.
I didn't see you, I apologize.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. My name is Collins. And my question would be, maybe if you could share some light with us of how you analyze the market for seeing that Stride focuses very much on early stage investments. How do you validate the market that these startups are targeting?
How we validate markets. All right, we don't really. The easiest mistake to make is to underestimate addressable markets. And we've made that mistake so many times, and I think everybody has, which is, especially when you go into, there's 2 mistakes you can make. One is you go into new markets and you completely underestimate how big they are. 2 is you underestimate the speed of, for example, digital transitions, or the extent to which you're expanding existing markets. And so we almost try and shy away a little bit from spending too much time validating markets. What we care a lot about is whether you're connecting with a customer need, problem, or etc. that we feel is quite meaningful. And then in categories that we consider to be new and exciting and large. So for example, if you did a company that did optimization of conversion funnel for e-commerce companies, we're unlikely to back that, because it may be an interesting business. It's in the what I would call incremental innovation category, and it's not the kind of stuff that we tend to look for. So usually we go like, okay, are we opening a completely new market where we can be number 1 or number 2, and that's meaningful enough? And you know, it's actually quite subjective, but we're really like fundamentally looking for new categories or new things, and not incremental innovation. Like we try and stay away from incremental innovation. At least that's our style. This is very specific to Stride, but we're looking for, you know, big new areas that we can conquer. Part of the reason, by the way, is if you're number 1 or 2, you're going to be strategic to someone, which means you can exit. Because the biggest problem in venture capital is that a lot of companies end up, like they'll go for 12, 15 years, they might be at 100 million euros in revenue, but nobody wants to buy them. And so we always look for whether we could be 1 or 2 in meaningful markets, so that we're either a problem to an existing incumbent, or we're exciting enough that you can take it public, or whatever it may be. So can we dominate or co-dominate a market segment is one of the things we think about a lot.
There's a question here.
How are we doing for time, by the way, Vlad?
Yeah, I think the last one.
Okay. 35 minutes, I mean, we're okay. Go for it.
So hello, my name is Maxime from Paris. My job is to mainly advise a company in the fundraising processes.
Yeah.
So actually I was interested in when you mentioned that basically startups should avoid dealing with toxic BAs, business angels, and toxic VCs. My point is how to know that. I mean, because due to the, you mentioned the power law, things making the fact that performance is not really related to the skills of the VCs. It's a big...
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it is the job of the entrepreneurial community to make sure that reputation and stories get shared. because your best source of quality information is going to be from inside the entrepreneurial community. And I think that you need to talk to each other. You need to understand the bad stories and the bad actors. It's almost impossible for us. I mean, on occasion, I out someone because I think some people's behavior is really odd. But in general, we can't really do it. Like, you know, we're such a small ecosystem, it's collaborative, and so we don't have that luxury. I think the entrepreneurial community should like make a point of like talking to each other and really understanding. The other thing is, so my first investments in a company called Realize 3D went bust, right? And actually it's even worse than that because I told Benoit, the founder, I was the first investor with 4 investors. And we tried everything strategically that we could think of. And I'm like, I really don't know what to do, right? So I came to the conclusion that I sat down with Benoit, I'm like, man, we get destroyed by Android coming in free on the mobile phones. Our business model has been exploded, and I don't know what else to do. We tried to pivot, and it didn't quite work. So I told Benoit, I'm like, look, A, I'm not gonna fund you any further, and B, you're allowed to lose my money. Right? In other words, I don't want you to spend the next 7 years of your life crucified to the cross, you know, trying to return cash. Like, you know, this failed, I don't know what to do with it. He was not happy at the time, but, you know, a year later, we're now quite close friends, and, you know, it's not like the process of failure destroyed our relationship. So I think one of the things you have to do is call entrepreneurs who failed and find out, you know, how it really went down. You know, if you talk to the founding team at Dailymotion, I mean, you're going to hear stories where like just blow your mind, right? And so you have to go do that work. And especially as an advisor, it might be tough. So you kind of have to rely on entrepreneur networks to kind of get that information back. I would say it's like, it's worth the time before you really go sign a check with someone. Because it is a long-term relationship, like I said, it's not one you can break. So I would always be very careful with that. I wonder how many entrepreneurs have taken 5 to 7 references on VCs they take money from. And it's kind of weird, right? You're going to reference your employee number 23 and call 5 people, but you're not going to call anybody about your main investors. Like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. It's got way more impact on you than your employee number 23. There's no simple answer to that. Markets are opaque. People tend not to talk about it. You just got to go dig, right? All right. Thank you very much.
Que la famille